Ambassador Hearn, Mayor Crossan, Mayor McBride, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I realise at this stage that I'm the only thing between you and lunch. So I can see this on the faces already. What I'd like to do is I'm going to give you a little bit of background about the case of Montreal, the Irish diaspora in Montreal, and also the Irish coming to Canada, and how that fits in with, and how that has been changing over the years. So let me first of all start by giving you some background on the Irish coming to Canada. So the first Irish actually arrived from France, not from Ireland. And they came in the mid-60s. They settled in the Quebec City area. At this stage, Quebec City is probably about 95% French-speaking. And but the Irish that came there were actually part of the Irish Brigade, the Wild Geese within the French Army, because the French came to Canada that way. Now these wore distinctive green uniforms, and it was very obvious to everybody that they were Irish. So when Canada became a battleground for the French and the English, the Irish that were part of the French army knew that they were in danger, because if they were Irish, they would immediately be executed as traitors. So what had happened was, and it's very interesting that a lot of people don't seem to realize that almost 40% of French Canadians are of Irish extraction. And I think that's one thing that we Irish have sometimes forgotten about, is what about the Irish diaspora that do not speak English as their first language? There's a huge diaspora in Argentina. I spoke at a conference there a few years ago and I was just absolutely amazed. But in the province of Quebec, where I live, up to 40% of French Canadians are actually of Irish extraction. And that's quite fascinating actually, because all the way from Donegal right down to Cork, particularly at the western seaboard, that's what hit Ireland most badly when it came to the time of the Great Hunger. And so many people came from there to Canada. They were accepted by the French-Canadian families because a lot of the immigrant ships were turned away from Boston and from New York because they had so much disease. So they actually came up to St. Lawrence, and there was a station there called Grosse, which means the Big Island. It was like Ellis Island in New York. So that's where the Irish came in there first. And there's a memorial there right now because it comes under the auspices of Parks Canada. So the Canadian government have made that as a national park. And if you ever get a chance to go there, it's absolutely fascinating, because they have all the names of the immigrants that came over there and that died. And there's a huge graveyard there with almost 6,000 people buried. And of course, the famine never made a difference between religions. So these people are all Catholics and Protestants. There's an Anglican church on the island as well that was put up there many years ago, at the time of the famine. So with that in mind, when we think of what happened with the Irish integrating into the French-Canadian families, a lot of them, even though they were orphans, they were allowed to keep their Irish names. But if they were involved in the army, many of them adopted French names. And they're very interesting, because the name Kelly in French became Keely. You probably heard of Jean-Claude Keely. The name Sullivan became Sylvain. And many of you know that famous, in fact, the most famous Canadian singer, the richest Canadian singer at the moment, is Celine Dion. Right? You've heard of Celine Dion, haven't you? There are 2 L's missing from her name. Her name was actually Dylan originally. So we can claim her as well, right? Okay, so something I want to show you here that I found very interesting when I went to Montreal first, and I'll have to step down here to show it to you. This is the Montreal city flag. It's the only flag I know of a city outside Ireland that's got a shamrock on there. So this is our city flag. Okay. That's the flag there. So we can see the founding races are represented there: the English, the Irish, the French, and the Scottish. Now, what had happened was, at the time of the Great Hunger, so many Irish arrived there, but the Irish went to work right away, as we always do, you know, when we go to another country. The Irish were working on the canals around Montreal. So a number of years ago, when there was work being done on one of the bridges, they found all these bones, and they realized that these were the bones of Irish immigrants, 6,000 Irish immigrants. They were doing a lot of work at Expo 67, the World's Fair in Montreal, and they came across this as well. So the workers that were building that bridge, Victoria Bridge, they found these bones, and this is the sign they put up there. So if you do get to Montreal, you will see that stone. They call it the Black Stone or the Irish Stone in Montreal, right at Victoria Bridge, and that commemorates the Irish immigrants. Every year, the last Sunday in May, there's always a memorial service at the stone. It's organized by the Ancient Order of Hibernians, and it's pretty emotional because you can see that after so many generations, these people are still commemorating the Irish immigrants from the time of the famine. So it is, it's a very, very touching sight. Now, let's get into when the Irish diaspora, when the Irish go abroad, we form organizations. We love to stick to each other. In fact, I heard somebody saying a few years ago, I was at some function, and somebody said, how come all you Irish hang around with each other? And the response was, well, if ever we find a nationality as interesting as ourselves, perhaps we'll change. So maybe that's one of the reasons for it. The first large Irish organization that started up was the St. Patrick's Society of Montreal. And the interesting thing about this society, when it started out, it was a lot of it were Protestant businessmen that had moved there from the north of Ireland, and they were very successful business people, and they really took care of their Catholic counterparts that came over that were mostly, many of them were destitute. So the organization was very successful, and it was a benevolent society. It still is a benevolent society today, and they have a lot of different functions. However, as time went by, the Protestant section realized that these guys weren't as loyal to the crown as they were. So they set up an offshoot called the Irish Protestant Benevolent Society. And as you can see from this one, there's a little crown on the top. But they're very much Irish, very green, and the societies got on extremely well together. So the Irish Protestant Benevolent Society is the benevolent. They will take care of anybody that's deserving and anybody that comes by tough times and so on. So we've got two benevolent societies in Montreal. We've got the St. Patrick's Society, which is non-denominational, the Irish Protestant Benevolent Society, which again, you've got to be of Irish extraction and Protestant to be a part of that society. They do help out, they get involved in the community, and they do a lot of good works. They help people that have got no connections whatsoever with Ireland or with the Irish, and they help out these destitute people. They run soup kitchens and things like this to help out. So these are the two larger organizations. Now, another organization is the United Irish Societies, and I can fill you in on their founding. In 1928, they took over the running of the St. Patrick's Day Parade, and they're doing this right up to this day. So the interesting thing about the St. Patrick's Day Parade in Montreal is it's the longest uninterrupted parade, St. Patrick's Day Parade in the world. The New York Parade, I think, was interrupted during the two World Wars. The St. Patrick's Day Parade in Montreal has never stopped. It's been run all the time. It is also the second largest St. Patrick's Day Parade in the world. And I was just amazed the first time I went there and said, how come that a city with not that many Irish born has got such a huge parade? Well, the answer is in, the Great Hunger. When the famine occurred in Ireland, so many Irish people lived there, and the people that you meet now in Montreal, so many of them, they're so proud of their Irish heritage. They've never been to Ireland in their lives, and they know very little about it. And as our friends from Belfast Airport and Dublin Airport realize, if we can get direct flights to Ireland, we'll get more of those people to come over here. They don't want to go through the hassle of going to the States or else going through Heathrow. So there is a huge market there for us in this Irish diaspora. The other message I would like to get across as well for people encouraging tourism is we also need to tap the French-Canadian market. There are so many French Canadians that are very proud of their Irish extraction. And I'll just give you a quick little story here as well. The city of Montreal wanted to get the various ethnic chambers of commerce together. So I got this letter, and you get invites to so many different meetings. You can only do so much, particularly when you're a volunteer. So I wasn't overly enthusiastic about this because I didn't see an awful lot coming out of it until I started getting all these phone calls from a young lady called Giselle Fillon. So she was very persistent and she said, you've got to be there. So finally, I went along there and I met this young French-Canadian girl with red hair and blue eyes. And and I realized why she wanted the Irish to be represented. She's a typical example of a French-Canadian Irish person. One story, I'll give you another one. A number of years ago, when I was working in the insurance business, my boss was from England, and he said to me when I got back from lunch one day, he said, listen, I had a call from a chappie. English people say words like that, don't they? So he said, this chappie is a French-Canadian, but he had an Irish name. Yves O'Brien was the guy's name. So he's a marine surveyor, he's trying to sell his services. Would you like to meet him? I said, sure. So I met the guy, and it was just fascinating. Because I'm originally from Ballina in County Mayo. This guy was from a village called Mayo in Quebec. So there's actually a village in Quebec called Mayo. So many Mayo immigrants have gone out there. So anyway, obviously, I gave the guy business, and worked out very well. And just a couple of years ago, I was at an Irish function in Montreal, and I met this young lady who was, again, French-Canadian, at Irish Studies at Concordia University. So I said, she introduced herself, and her name was O'Brien. And I said, I've only met one O'Brien in my life. It was a guy called Yves O'Brien. She said, yeah, that's my dad. So, you know, interesting world. I contacted my brother in Ballina, and I asked him, I said, you know, do you know anything about O'Briens in Mayo? And he said, yeah. He said, they all left. There are none. You know, there's none left. There are no O'Briens now in County Mayo. The only O'Briens that you can get are French Canadians living in the province of Quebec. So that's a story that you know, I find very, very interesting. All right, let's move along here. Another association, they just celebrated their 80th anniversary, the Erin Sports Association. Again, these are descendants of the immigrants of the famine. There's not one Irish-born person in the organization. They set up in 1931 in a working class area of Montreal known as Point St. Charles. And the other thing about Point St. Charles is the main street in Point St. Charles is called St. Patrick's Street. So the Irish, there's a very, very strong Irish connection there. So these people set up this club. It's father to son. It goes on generation to generation. You can't get in there, you have to be invited. But they're very, very proud of their Irish ancestry, their Irish background. They have their own club, which is really interesting because it was set up as a working class group. And their clubhouse is over a garage. The first time I went there, I said, well, this is the nearest thing I found to a shebeen outside Ireland. They've got their own bar. Sure, they don't have a license. And last year, somebody was talking about Ray Bassett, the current ambassador, the current ambassador to Irish ambassador to Canada. It was quite a character. And I told Ray Bassett about this. I said, you know, they have an evening where they have the honouring of the Irishman of the Year. So he went against all advice, said, don't tell the Department of Foreign Affairs and Government please about this. So he came along and he had a great night. You know, it was absolutely super. So they're just a wonderful crowd, and they're so proud of their Irish heritage. Again, when we're looking at encouraging people to come to Ireland, these are the type of people that we can encourage. But, you know, as I keep saying, the direct air links are so important between Canada and Ireland. We're really pushing for this at the moment, and I know the ambassador is doing this as well. We're also working on it in Canada. Now, next organisation is the Gaelic Athletic Association, founded in 1949 in Montreal. An organisation that I'm very, very closely attached to because I'm a former captain. In fact, when I went there first, some guy said to me, watching my time here, I went to the practice and he said, can you travel? I said, well, listen, I've come out here from Ireland. That's a start, isn't it? So he said, well, we play in the Northern Division of the North American League, and that means that in Montreal, you have to travel to Syracuse, Rochester, Buffalo, and Toronto. So I try and tell people that these days. At 6 o'clock on a Sunday morning, get into a car, drive from Montreal to Toronto, you play a game, and if the hurling team are short, you play a hurling match as well. And as one of my Cork friends used to say to me, he said, you know, you're not bad, Loftus, for somebody from a non-traditional hurling county. So anyway, you play the game, you get out there, you pitch in. But it was incredible because, you know, you're going down there, you play your game, you have a sandwich and a beer afterwards, you go back to Montreal, and then you get into work the next day. Now, can you imagine going from Mallinhead to the Lakes of Killarney and back again in one day? Well, that's what we used to do for the football. But we had, you know, I got to know an awful lot of people, and it was a great organisation to belong to, and it still is. In fact, when people come over now, when we talk about the diaspora, when young Irish people come to Montreal, and I'll show you in a couple of minutes about the rugby club, they join either the Gaelic club or the rugby club. Many of us, particularly from the west of Ireland, play both. So, in fact, every year in August we have this game. The rugby club and the Gaelic club play each other in Gaelic football, and we have a big barbecue and so on, and we bring our friends out there. So again, very strong part of Irish culture in Montreal. It attracts a lot of young people. But the other thing as well, and I had an email, I'm corresponding actually at the moment with the president of the Gaelic Athletic Association in Montreal, who's from Galway. And just the email I got yesterday, Irish immigrant in town looking for work. So we get this, it circulates from the Gaelic club into the rugby club and into the various societies. And I think that's one of the fascinating things about diaspora, is we look after each other. And I think that's very extremely important. So anybody coming out to Canada, it's very important that they get in touch, first of all, with the different Irish organizations. As I keep saying, I have zero tolerance for Irish unemployment. So let's get people jobs right away. They may be underemployed for a while, but let's get them a job, and then it's easier to get a job, another job, once you have a job already. So that's what we're looking at. Ancient Order Have a Burning is another organization that goes back a long time as well. They do a lot of interesting work. They organize this every year, what they call the Walk to the Stone, to commemorate the Irish immigrants that died at the time of the famine. This is the Montreal Irish Rugby Football Club. At the moment it's fielding 3 men's teams and 2 women's teams. And the current captain actually happens to be a lad from Derry called Mark Gallagher. So again, very successful organisation, very active organisation. And this year the rugby club won the Cup, the Quebec Cup. And it was interesting because they beat Ottawa Irish in the final. So we had 2 Irish teams in the final, which is quite nice. Another thing about the rugby club as well is they have this huge email list. So somebody arrives in town, the #1 objective is to get that person a job. So that email is sent out to everybody. This person has arrived in town. The CV is an attachment. Have a look. Contact your friends. Make sure we get this person a job. Because what we want to do is the last thing I would encourage anybody to do is immigrate from Ireland. But if you do have to immigrate, then we're going to make sure that we take care of you when you come out there. And the first thing you do is you get a job, and then you get involved in the different organizations. Tara Golf Club, this was founded by a guy who played with the Royal Tara before he came to Montreal, and he said, well, why don't we have a golf association in Montreal? He started up the Tara Golf Association, and it's still going strong. And this is the organization I helped found over 20 years ago. We just celebrated our 20th anniversary in December. So I'll just give you a little bit of background. When I started coming up with the idea, somebody said, well, you know, we've got so many Irish organizations already. In fact, we have over 30 different Irish organizations in Montreal. So I said, yeah, we have, but none of them is catering to business. You know, there's a British Chamber of Commerce, there's a German Chamber of Commerce, there's a Polish Chamber, and so on. It's about time we had an Irish Chamber, you know. So obviously, I wanted to make it an all-Ireland organization, completely non-political, non-sectarian. So I purposely used the word Ireland instead of Irish, so that way we can take care of everybody. So we started off 20 years ago. There was an organization in Toronto called the Dublin Businessmen's Association. So we got them to change that and become a chapter of the Ireland County Chamber in Toronto. Now the interesting thing about how this set up is there was myself and a lawyer from Cork called Peter Kirby, and we had lunch, then we talked about this other guy, Dan O'Brien, who was Vice President of Corby's Distilleries at the time in Montreal. It's always a great idea to have a guy that's working for a distillery when you're setting up an organization. He was a tremendous help in hosting receptions for us. Then we said, well, we want to make this a national organization. So there's a guy in Toronto called Ted McConnell from Belfast, and Ted was the former honorary Irish consul in Toronto. And just by a mere coincidence, it happened that all 4 provinces were represented. I'm from Connacht, Peter Kirby was from Munster, Dan O'Brien from Leinster, and Ted McConnell from Ulster. So that was a pure coincidence, but I think that tells you what the organisation is like. It's an all-Ireland organisation. We've hosted a cross-border trade mission from Uri and Dundalk, and if I go back a number of years ago, I think there was also a trade mission from Derry at one stage or other. So we're there, we're at the other side. So when it comes to business, obviously you've got Invest NI, you've got Enterprise Ireland and IDA and so on. which have also got the chambers of commerce that are less formal. We are now in Ottawa, Toronto, Edmonton, Calgary, and Vancouver. So we've got a complete link right across Canada of Irish chambers of commerce. Now, a few other things I'd like to talk about, and I'm watching my time closely. There are two stories that are dear to my heart that I must get out here while we talk. And one of them is a number of years ago, I was in New York City. I drove to New York, and I was driving back. And when you come out of New York City, the speed limit goes, it's 40 miles, it's 30 miles, it's 50 miles, it's up and down like a yo-yo. So you don't know, you're just trying to watch your speed. Anyway, I got a ticket. So this cop stops, gives me a ticket. And you'll never know the place in New York where I got the ticket. There's a place called Ulster. Anybody ever been out? Just north of New York, there's a place called Ulster, and I happened to get a ticket in Ulster. So the guy says to me, he gives me the ticket, and he said, right, he said, here you go, you can defend yourself at this court case or something like that. And I thought to myself at the time, yeah, I will, because I don't like getting this ticket. Why didn't some American get this ticket? Why do you have to stick it on a Canadian car, you know? And that was about the time, and the ambassador showed appreciate this, when Jean Chrétien was Prime Minister, and the Americans went into Iraq, and the Canadians refused. They said, no, we're not going into that war. So, you know, the Americans were really, really annoyed with us at that stage. And I thought, well, maybe this is the reason I'm getting a ticket. I shouldn't be getting a ticket for this. So I went back to Montreal, I checked on my schedule, and I said, if I'm free that date when the court case is on, I'm going to go down there and defend myself. So anyway, I checked, and I was overseas actually in Asia on business, so I couldn't go and defend myself. Anyway, a few months later, I'm going to Vermont. Vermont is near the Quebec border, so I said, okay. And I just thought to myself, I never heard from these guys in Ulster about my ticket. So I get a bit worried at this stage, because if you cross the border into the US and there's a ticket outstanding, they can actually confiscate your car. So I thought, hey, this is serious, I better do something about this. So I phoned the county courthouse in Ulster and New York, and they said, well, we can't find your file, can you phone us tomorrow? Imagine you're trying to pay somebody money on this and you phone us again. So I reluctantly phoned again the next day, and they said, well, yes, Mr. Loftus, we have traced your file. And I said, well, what's happening? So, well, I've just looked at this, and there's a note on the file to say that Officer Seamus Murphy has decided not to press charges. That's one. Let me tell you another one. I was working one summer at this Irish pub. I was at UCD at the time, and I'm working in this Irish pub in Montreal. And they wanted to make it in Irish, and of course it's a French, obviously it's a French province, Quebec. So they gave the pub a very interesting name. They called it Le Shillelagh. Right? I remember telling a friend of mine from Cork, he said, where did you work for the summer, Paul? I said, well, I was working in a pub called Le Shillelagh. He said, that's almost like having a pub in Cork called Un Eskimo. So there we go. Anyway, I'm working in this pub, and this guy comes in one night. When you're running a pub, you know, you've got to be good friends with the guards, right, or the police over there. So this lieutenant from the police came over, and he said to the owner, he said, are there any Irish people working in this place? And he said, yeah. He said, one guy here from Ireland, I'll introduce you. So I was introduced to the guy, and the guy said, listen, he said, I'll tell you an interesting story. Many years ago, when I was a constable, I was called down to this bar on the docks, because in those days, the Irish used to come in by ship. So this Irish immigrant arrived, and the first thing he did was he went to a pub. He wanted to celebrate his new country. I'm arrived in Canada, this is a great country, so he got his suitcases and he went into this pub, had a few pints, and of course, burst into song. So the waiter came over and he said, Monsieur, there's no singing in this place. You can't sing, you're not allowed to sing. And he said, are you crazy? He said, what do you do after a few beers? So he carried on singing, and the guy said to him, the owner said, listen, he said, if you carry on singing, I'll have to phone the police and have you arrested. So he persisted. He was just so pleased to be in his new country. Anyway, the police arrived, and this guy I was talking to was a constable at that time. And he said, I came over to arrest the guy, and I asked him to show his identification. And I looked at his passport, and his name was Michael O'Sullivan. He said, moi, je m'appelle Michel O'Sullivan. His name was Michel O'Sullivan. So he said, what did I do? He said, I couldn't arrest the guy. I took him home for dinner to meet my family. So these are diaspora stories that you will hear, and they're pretty dear to my heart. But I think the important thing to remember, the message that I want to get across today, is that we do have lots of different organizations. So when Ireland is going through tough times, and we've got Irish organizations there at the other end, we take care of each other. That's what we're there for, and that's what we enjoy doing and helping out. A couple of other organizations. There's an organization called Cine Gael, which is an Irish film society, and in the winter months, we get a long winter in Montreal, from about the, in fact the first showing was last Saturday, from the end of January until about the middle of April, every second week there's an Irish movie. So this is a great way, of course, for promoting Ireland as well. So this promotes the Irish film industry, and they have some really, really interesting speakers as well. They always get guest speakers. Another group is the School of Irish Music, Shimsa, and as you can see down here, it's in the 3 languages. So they get together, Irish traditional musicians, very, very popular in Montreal as well, and right across Canada. In fact, if you ever get to Vancouver, I'm sure you'll find a cousin of mine, Helen Loftus, playing a fiddle in a pub over there someplace. So the Irish bring, we're talking about culture. Music is a big part of our culture, and it's something of which we are very proud. So there are Irish music groups right across the country. Now, St. Patrick's Day Parade in Montreal, this is an organization, another Irish organization called the Innisfail Sports and Social Club. That lady there at the front hosted a reception last week, and she's from Tipperary, Anne Broden is her name. So what happens is, and I often say this, is the other ethnic groups have their national day. We Irish start celebrating St. Patrick's Day before the end of January, and we go right on through till the end of March. It's just absolutely incredible. Why can't you settle for a day? It's just like you guys here in Buncrana. You do anything to attract attention. The Northern Lights and an earthquake in the city within 2 days. Fantastic. I really admire you. I don't know how you arrange that, but it's very well done. Okay, got a few more. That's Maya saying there at the front. The St. Patrick's Parade. It's a really big thing. I used to say it's the second largest St. Patrick's Day parade in the world. And that's a sunny day, but sometimes there's a snowstorm. But we still go there. On Saturday, you see a week on Saturday, they're selecting the St. Patrick's Day Queen and the various princesses. And she may kill me for this, but you've got one of the ex-St. Patrick's Day Parade princesses right here with us today. Jennifer McKeever was one of the... Do you remember when I convinced you? Jennifer is from Montreal, by the way. She's living in Derry now. But I had to convince her to go in there. It's a great experience. It's actually a public speaking. You get up in front of 600 people and you just tell them why you should be the greatest Irish lady in Montreal. So there we go. You got a lot of bands in the parade as well. They come from different parts of Quebec and different parts of the province of Ontario, and also from upstate New York. See, where we're located in Montreal, the New York state border is only 45 minutes drive for me. So we often go down there and just go across the border and do a bit of shopping. But unlike the border here, there is a border, you get stopped on the way back. So you gotta make sure that you don't buy too much. So, that's it. That's Montreal, that's the setting there. Boy, look at that, I'm even proud of my time. So there we go, folks. Listen, thank you very much for your attention. I hope you enjoyed it.